Hey, welcome to Film Fanatics, three film geeks discussing movies new and old. My name is Dan.
My name is Justin.
And I'm Joe.
This week we take a look at a couple of big new releases, American Hustle, which is racking up nominations for various awards, and the long-awaited sequel to Anchorman. In our triple feature, we watched Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol, Scrooged, starring Bill Murray, and The Age of Innocence is our Oscar A to Z film for the week, and we will review all three, of course. And because of the many ghosts in Scrooged and the title of the fourth Mission Impossible movie mentioning ghosts, our top 5 this week is films with ghosts in them. First, though, we've got 2 comic book adaptation news items this week, one from the world of Marvel and one from DC Comics. In Marvel news, Paul Rudd has signed on to play AntMan, most likely the Dr. Hank Pym, is it Pym or Pym?
It's Pym.
Pym version, in Edgar Wright's directorial take on the character. And with a July 2015 release date, Marvel seems to be betting big on it. And then in DC news, Joseph Gordon-Levitt has signed on to star in and direct a Sandman movie. Now, this is the Neil Gaiman creation, not the character we've already seen on screen in Spider-Man 3 from Marvel. There's no screenwriter yet for this, so it could be in the works for a while. But I am unfamiliar with both of these characters, so I want to hear from you guys first. Joe, why don't we hear from you?
Well, in terms of Ant-Man, I think it's interesting that they're doing it after the second Avengers film. And Hank Pym is the individual who actually creates the Being Ultron, who will be the antagonist for the second Avengers movie. The thing that's interesting about it is Paul Rudd is a very fun, likable guy, which I think is a really good move, because Hank Pym is one of the most despicable, unlikable characters in Marvel. So, admittedly, because the Marvel Studios has done a really good job of making their characters likable and relatable, it should be fine, because I believe Edgar Wright's directing it. He's a very comedic director, so it'll probably have a very light tone, probably be really fun, kind of going hand in hand with a lot of these Marvel movies.
Like sort of like the Iron Man
probably
series.
Along those lines,
okay.
And Thor to some extent. It'd just be fun. I think it should be fine. I'm not worried about it, but I'm definitely excited to see it. In terms of Sandman, I mean, it's good to know that Joseph Gordon-Levitt is behind it, because he's got a lot of talent, and I think he has some respect for comic book related films.
Yeah, I do think he's a real comic book kind of guy.
I believe I've heard that, so
yeah.
I'm sure that he would take time, and he, at the very least, he'll give a good performance. I'm excited to see it, see what happens. The thing is, it's probably one of the most ambitious and really best titles to come out of DC, because Neil Gaiman is an awesome fantasy writer. He's done a lot of things, but that's probably his most famous work. And
it's very old school, right? From like the 40s.
Partially.
Okay.
There are multiple versions of the Sandman from DC that are kind of part of this bigger storyline.
Gotcha.
But most likely the one that he's going to be involved with is going to be the Morpheus, King of Dreams, this kind of godlike being that sort of moves throughout the DC universe and follows him. It's something that'll be very difficult, I think, to adapt. They'll probably just go for the origin story, because it's a very trippy, surreal, atmospheric type of series. But it is very interesting. It brings a lot of aspects of mythology and cultural references, historical references. It covers a lot of ground, so I think it could be tricky to pull off, but if they take their time, it could be, at the very least, interesting.
And you said he is a character that sort of weaves in and out of the DC universe. Is he somebody that we could see in the Justice League movie then?
Not really. He's kind of more of a background character, so to speak.
Okay.
He's met up with Batman and Superman, and helps them out occasionally, but it's kind of like basically one of the Greek gods coming down to help a hero. It only happens so often. So he kind of has a lot of responsibilities that go well beyond what the Justice League normally deals with. But it's also kind of a very human tale, kind of focusing on his internal struggles, because basically the Sandman is a character that was imprisoned for a long time, comes out and has to kind of get back in the running with taking care of people's dreams, because that's sort of his responsibility.
Okay. Justin, are you familiar with these characters?
Sandman, not so much. Ant-Man, I know a little bit about. The upside with Ant-Man is, like Joe mentioned, Edgar Wright is at the helm, which means at bare minimum, it's going to be a funny movie. The thing that I think is kind of interesting about this, though, is Edgar Wright is much more physical humor with just a little wordplay on the side here and there. Paul Rudd is much more plays on words, usually playing off somebody else in a sort of straightforward manner. So I'm curious to see how he's going to handle the overall action focus of the film. As far as it being in the Marvel Universe, I think it's going to be a big variable, because the thing about the Marvel Universe is largely it's about making these sort of fun movies that are more or less escapist entertainment, whereas DC is much more serious and I think we're going to see that a bit more in Phase 2 with Guardians of the Galaxy, which I'm very curious to see how it's going to end up doing. I'm figuring it's either going to be really, really good or a complete mess. I'm really hoping it's the first one because it sounds hilarious. But as far as Sandman goes, obviously I'm not as familiar with it as you are, but I've seen pictures here and there, and it does have sort of surreal look that you've mentioned. And Don John did sort of hint that the man does have style. He just needs to solidify it more. And I think Sandman, as long as he handles it carefully.
So a good stepping stone, at least.
Yeah, at least a good starting point.
Well, it's definitely a lot to take on because it's a difficult thing to adapt. So if he does it, it's ambitious and he's brave. You know?
Yeah.
So give him some credit no matter what happens. It's a tough one to get by.
Yeah, I mean, these are both guys that I like, so it'll be interesting to see what their take is. Like I said, I'm not really familiar with either of these characters. Ant-Man, I guess, does have a fairly large following, though, because I was asked by a couple of different people what I thought of Paul Rudd doing Ant-Man, and I said, I don't know who Ant-Man is, but I like Paul Rudd, so...
Well...
And I like, most everything Marvel does.
I think it's going to be fine. People... I don't know how many people really like the character, but people understand the importance of the character, and
Okay.
I think that it's going to be kind of like with Robert Downey Jr. as Tony Stark. It's kind of bring new life and bring even more fans to the character, so I think that's going to be the best possible thing to happen to him. Will he be a fan favorite? I don't know.
Well, I think it would be very cool to see Paul Rudd, if they bring him in like for Avengers 3, sort of with all of the other cast members and playing off each other.
That's most likely going to happen because, unless something happens
From the
in
sound
film,
of it, yeah.
Because Ant-Man is one of the key members of the Avengers, and even when some of the big guys leave, like Thor or the Hulk, Ant-Man's one of the center members of the team. So
Very cool.
He'll be sticking around most likely.
All right. Well, let's kick off our new releases for the week, and we start with American Hustle. Justin?
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I just want to start this off by saying this is quite literally hot off the presses, so I apologize if it's a little bit raw.
Yeah, we just wrapped up watching this movie about a half hour ago.
So, in American Hustle, we focus on Irving, played by Christian Bale, and Edith, if that is her real name, played by Amy Adams, who are two con artists who have just been caught by an FBI agent named Richie, played by Bradley Cooper. They decide to work with him to expose corruption from political officials and the mafia. But slowly, everyone, including Irving's wife, played by Jennifer Lawrence, ends up getting involved and impacting the risks. American Hustle's greatest strength serves as probably its biggest issue. It has truly memorable characters. Each character has their own originality and has their own storyline, and that takes a fair bit of time to develop. However, with so many of these characters and perspectives, it causes the film to drag in more than a couple spots, possibly making the film run on just a little bit too long. Although the ensemble gives very, very strong performances, particularly Jennifer Lawrence, who, as far as I'm concerned, never ceases to amaze me. The writing and style, notably with the strange zoom in whenever any character seems to appear shocked, and the somewhat exaggerated actions of the characters, particularly when they get mad, just comes off as exaggerated and a bit over the top. Admittedly, it's nowhere near as good as David O. Russell's last film in 2012, Silver Linings Playbook, but it still shows that the man is developing as a filmmaker and coming up with new ideas to put on film. It's still a great film worth a watch, and I give American Hustle a B+.
That's a little bit lower than I was hoping. About 4 or 5 movies come out every year that I really look forward to for months and months, and no matter how many times we see the trailers, I don't care. I still love it. American Hustle, for me, was definitely one of these movies for 2013. The cast boasts some of my favorites, including Amy Adams, Jeremy Renner, and Jennifer Lawrence, and as well the director of 2 movies that have placed in my year-end top 5, Silver Linings Playbook and The Fighter. With American Hustle, my guess is that David O. Russell makes it 3. It isn't quite an A+ like Silver Linings, but it is very, very close. There were a few directing choices that I thought were a little weird. Justin sort of hit on a couple of those. And with all the characters and with all the double and triple crossing going on, a few things were a little bit confusing for me, though upon a rewatch they may get sorted out. But the acting was, of course, amazing with this kind of cast, specifically from Adams, Christian Bale, and, of course, Jennifer Lawrence. And Russell's use of the time period and the music from it to bring you into the story really, really worked for me. Overall, this is definitely one of the best of the year, and it gets an A from me. Joe, how did you like American Hustle?
It's kind of weird. It's sort of a combination of what you guys said, so I think we're pretty much on the same point. Basically, I want to say that I think the writing throughout American Hustle was pretty solid overall, and I thought the dialogue was really great, which helped bring the characters to life. But mostly, I think that was through superb acting. I mean, pretty much every cast member does a fantastic job. As you guys say, Christian Bale, probably one of his best performances. I really think so. Jennifer Lawrence was fantastic. And I even think Bradley Cooper did a great job.
He did. Even some of the surprise... I mean, Louis C.K. is in the movie.
That's right.
And does a great job.
You know, it's funny. When Amy Adams did the English accent, I thought she was kind of weaving in and out. I thought, wait, she's not getting that accent down. And then I realized that's what she was doing
That's
the
her
whole time.
character,
And she
right.
could do both accents just perfectly. I was like, that's just great acting there. And there was an element in this movie, the mafia element, and a really interesting cameo I thought was pretty cool.
Yeah, agreed.
Very, very fitting. I liked that. Each layer of the story draws you in and allows you to see the con from every character's unique point of view. There was some interesting camera work. Some of it worked, some of it didn't. I do agree it was a bit over the top at points, but I thought it was different. I also thought the costumes and the music were really convincing as well to bring about the feel of the time period.
Yeah.
Definitely.
However, the film's narration can get a bit annoying at points, and it also does border on being slow, though I'd never say it gets boring per se. The film also has a good sense of humor and a clear message, though the ending does feel strangely anticlimactic, though I think that's probably due to the advertising. I think they were trying to make it seem a little more like a thriller. I'm not really sure. But overall, I think it was a good movie, and I give it also a B+.
I did not find it overly long or slow like you guys did. That is a complaint that I've heard from other people.
I wouldn't call it slow. I just think it drags a little bit.
It's like the end of certain transitions between one storyline and one perspective feels like it gets a bit uneven at points.
Okay.
I think that's where it drags a bit.
Yeah, I would agree with that. The voiceover thing you mentioned kind of surprised me. Admittedly, at the start, it kind of bothered me because it felt like it was David O. Russell kind of ripping off Goodfellas. But once we got into like Act 2 and 3, where it disappeared completely, I was okay with it.
Well, that's the thing. I felt there was a little bit of an inconsistency. I mean, they used that and implemented it well, and then they just kind of dropped it, and that sort of confused me. And then when it came back, it kind of annoyed me again. So I guess he wasn't sure how he wanted to use it. Maybe he felt like that was going to be a strong thing he was going to weave in and out, but then decided to drop it.
I think he was trying to keep it as a bookend. Maybe it was a little inconsistent, because it sort of starts at the beginning and then only comes back briefly as part of the epilogue.
Well, that was pretty much the setup, which was good, but then they don't do anything like that again. It's pretty much chronological after that point.
That's true.
Did you like that they used multiple perspectives in the voiceover?
I thought that was cool. I mean, that's actually something that really made it more engaging, because if it was just like Christian Bale's voiceover throughout the whole thing, that would have gotten obnoxious.
Right.
But no, I liked the fact that they showed everybody's unique point of view. You don't see that too often, and I thought that helped bring the characters to life.
Yeah.
Get inside their heads. I did like it. I'm just saying that I'm not sure if it was used as properly as it could have been.
Truth be told, I think if it had been implemented more, it would have been overkill.
Maybe, but I felt like they just bombarded us with it in the first act.
Well,
Maybe the dropping was too abrupt.
That's true.
Joe, have you ever seen The Fighter? Because I loved it. Justin, not really a big fan of it.
I actually never seen The Fighter.
Okay, I would love for you to watch it and hear your thoughts.
Yeah, it's one that I've always wanted to see. I've heard good things about it. I mean, of course, I've seen Silver Linings.
Right.
Silver Linings, I think I might have liked a little better than this one.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I mean, it's hard to top Silver Linings.
It was smoother. Definitely.
Yeah.
But I liked it. The film tried different things, and it really did have a good atmosphere to it. And I do think the characters were interesting and well acted, but the narrative just felt a bit odd to me.
Okay. Well, let's move on to Anchorman 2, The Legend Continues. Joe, let's hear about that.
This sequel to 2004's beloved comedy finds Ron Burgundy, played by Will Ferrell, married to Veronica Corningstone, played by Christina Applegate, and along with their young son, seem to be doing well. This changes, however, when Ron is finally fired for years of obvious incompetence and his wife is given a promotion. But Ron finds a new opportunity. He is approached to become the lead of a news team for a 24-hour station, albeit at the 2 a.m. to 5 a.m. slot. Ron goes and rallies up his former cohorts from the previous film, and various hijinks ensue. I'm not really sure how I felt about Anchorman 2. I certainly can say that I thought the story was fun, and I was engaged throughout the film. I also felt that some of the jokes and running gags did work, though I never found myself overcome with laughter. Like the first film, it throws a lot of comedy out there. Some of it worked for me and some didn't. I also felt that Will Ferrell felt a bit outshined by everyone else in the movie. In fact, it seemed like the cast wasn't used to playing these characters after nearly a decade. As it's on film, it's a little weaker on that side, but as a sequel to Anchorman, it still works pretty well. Overall, I leave Anchorman 2 with a B-.
Yeah, put me in the group of the people who do not obsess over the original Anchorman. I saw it in theaters when it was first out, and me and my friends just sort of left scratching our heads asking what we just watched. I like all the actors in the first film, and the guest cameos were fantastic, but I wasn't getting it, I guess. But I took a second look over the weekend to kind of prepare for the new one, and between the trailers that I've been seeing for Anchorman 2 and all the comedic appearances that the cast has been doing the last few weeks in character, I was actually pretty excited for the legend to continue. And I have to admit, though I stand by my original viewpoint of the first film, I can see how people enjoy it more upon multiple viewings because they know what to expect from it. I think that was my biggest problem with the first one, is it sort of felt so over the top, and I didn't really expect that. But with Anchorman 2, you go in sort of knowing what to expect. It picks up immediately with what people already know about these characters. Completely off-the-wall shenanigans, unrealistic scenarios, and probably some catchphrase will come out of this one as well after people have viewed it multiple times. For me, though, it's actually a little bit too stupid. I definitely laughed upon multiple occasions, but at the same time, I'm all for dumb comedy, but it has to be written smartly. Steve Carell's Brick character has many of the funniest lines of the movie, yet he has an IQ somewhere around the area of a paint can. And as much as I love Kristen Wiig, I don't know that finding somebody as equally stupid as a love interest worked for me. The original movie also clocks in at a tidy hour and 38 minutes. This one is 2 full hours, and I know that I would have enjoyed the absolutely priceless scene at the end of it if it had come about 20 minutes sooner. The bottom line for me is, if you're one of the people who loves the original, you'll love the second one just as much. I enjoyed the second one about as much as the first one, and for me, just like Joe, that means a B-. Justin, what'd you think?
Alright, after taking several years just attempting to convince Paramount that this was a good idea, it's hard to call Anchorman 2 much more than fan service. The original was largely love it or hate it. I'm somewhere in between the two among audiences, so I can't say I'm surprised Paramount was reluctant on the idea of a sequel. However, for fan service, I have to say it does a great job giving fans what they want and in abundance. The story moves at a brisk pace despite the occasional awkward antics that Dan mentioned are quite possibly too stupid. I think it got weird, but I wouldn't say it got overly dumb. I still giggled on more than a couple occasions.
I thought the first one was dumber, personally.
I would agree with that, actually. Admittedly, the best gags are saved until the last 10 to 20 minutes of the film, but the payoff is well worth it. I can't say a third installment would be warranted, but I do feel comfortable saying that this was more than satisfactory for fan service, and I give it a B.
I don't know, some of the stupid gags worked, like we've seen in the previews. You know, there's a whole mess of stuff in this camper that they're driving in, and he puts it on cruise control, and everybody, flips, the van flips, and the bowling ball hits Paul Rudd in the head, and I mean, that to me was really, really funny, and I enjoyed watching, the full extended scene in the film, but there's just so many really stupid things, and if like we're saying, if you're a fan of the original, you'll love this one. You thought the original was more stupid than this?
Maybe slightly more so. Like, there was an underlying theme I thought was kind of smart about, kind of the integrity of the news and how it kind of got evolved into this sort of mass media thing based upon just carnage. And he's like, just you don't have to do real news, just say random stuff. I mean, it's an exaggeration, but it does have some weight. I thought that was kind of a nice little commentary.
I was going to say, I enjoyed the satire, to be honest with you.
I thought that satire was kind of smart. That's why I think it was smarter than the first one.
Okay, I can get behind that statement. So maybe the plot is a little smarter, but I think the gags are a little dumber.
This is the thing. I think they wanted to keep the gags, and some of them worked, some of them didn't. I think the stuff where they tried to go over the top and try to beat the first movie, it worked. But I think kind of running over the same gags originally felt kind of silly. And that's one thing I noticed with the performances and the writing of the plot, is the plot felt like a older, more developed, mature plot.
Okay.
The characters were still dumb or exaggerated, but they had grown up. It's like I said, it felt like Paul Rudd was a different person than he was playing his character back in the original movie.
Right.
And I felt like there definitely was some growth there with the characters, so it felt like a different movie. It felt like, obviously, the writers now, I forget his name.
Adam McKay.
Yeah, Will Ferrell's writer.
Yeah.
You know, he's gotten older, he's matured, he's gotten, you know, he's different, and he's evolved, and that's something that I think is evident in the film. And that's why I think it's trying to be different and maybe a little smarter. That's why the old stuff might feel a little out of place and too dumb for some people.
Well, yeah, like for example, I don't know how you guys felt about this gag, but the whole thing with raising the baby shark, that to me like just fell flat. I thought this is even for Anchorman, this is dumb. You liked it?
I thought that was kind of funny.
Okay,
But by stupid humor standards, yes, I did find that moderately amusing. Yes.
I thought it was pretty dumb. I mean, I thought the cameos with the paralleling the similar random fight from the first movie.
Oh, that was by far
the most
That
epic.
was amazing.
By far the best part of the movie.
That might be one of the most epic things ever created. It was
I will agree with you on this, though. I mean, everybody sort of, maybe not everybody, but most of the cast do outshine Will Ferrell. And the scenes where it was just him or him and Christina Applegate were a little bit less than for me.
And I think that's because it's been a while since he's played the character and it wasn't that smooth for him to get back into it.
Probably. But going off of your issue with the raising the shark thing, I thought the entire bit with him having to deal with being blind was like watching a mediocre SNL sketch.
I agree. I absolutely agree. That's another one.
You know, that's a good example. I thought it was kind of funny at first, but I was like, is Ron Burgundy really that dumb that he doesn't know how to use his other senses? Like, I don't think he's that dumb. I think it is too much.
It's one of those, it probably sounded funny on paper, but in execution it just
It's a little weird.
went on entirely too long for starters.
It got old fast.
Yeah, I would agree with all that. Also, I know it's Anchorman, I know it's a comedy, but I had some issues with the liberties they took with the timeline, because the timeline of events didn't make any sense, and also there were things that they were referencing that wouldn't have come out till years later.
Yeah, I thought some of that was a bit weird. Like, I wasn't sure that took place in 1980. I thought it was still like... Yeah, it seemed like you didn't know how much longer it took after the first movie. Was it a year? 5 years?
Right.
Originally, when I saw them, I thought, has it been like 10, 15 years? Like, it seemed like it could have been...
Give or take,
Yeah. I mean, they mentioned in the movie, like, around 1979, 1980 is pretty much when it took place.
Like, for 1980, this was pretty big. So, okay,
But-
we're in the 80s now.
Right.
But how long did it take?
Well,
to
they
get
mentioned
there?
MTV at one point, which didn't even exist until 1981.
Yeah, I wanted to ask...
That was, like, that bothered me a little bit.
Especially if they had news, it was like, what?
Yeah, right, yeah, their news department didn't come about till about 84.
They're up and running. I mean...
Right.
I guess it's one of those things where it's supposed to be flexible, but you're right. I was wondering that too, like, 1980, like, did they exist then?
Right.
I guess they almost did, but...
Yeah. All right, well, let's move on here. Our next new release is, well, another dumb comedy, I suppose, a Madea Christmas. This is the latest installment of the Tyler Perry written, directed, produced, and starring comedy series, with Medea, the outspoken pistol-packing granny, and in this one she tries her hand at working retail for the holidays with her niece Eileen, played by Anna Maria Horsford, and the two of them take a surprise trip to the country to visit Eileen's daughter, a schoolteacher played by Tika Sumpter, and her farmhand, a white boy who she's secretly in a relationship with. In classic Medea fashion, the supporting cast for this movie is a bit like a random who's who of yesterday, and this time it includes Larry the Cable Guy, Sister Act star Kathy Najimy, and The Facts of Life's Lisa Whelchel. There isn't nearly as much heavy sweeping from crazy comedy to hardcore melodrama in Madea Christmas as there is in most of Perry's work, which is a good thing, but the comedy is no less juvenile and absurd than it usually is. I like the Medea character, though even I'm starting to get kind of sick of her antics, and especially the constant mispronunciation of everything. That lost its luster for me about 3 Medea movies ago. However, once Larry the Cable Guy and Kathy Najimy show up about halfway into the film, I did start genuinely laughing. There are a few really good bits here. Unfortunately, they're surrounded by horrible acting, like always with Perry, and especially from the children in the film. There's lousy writing and a fairly ridiculous plot as well. But, as usual with the Medea movies, I do have to say I laughed a little bit. I'm going to give A Madea Christmas a D+. Justin?
Well, let me start off by saying this was my first run-in with the character of Medea. I've only ever seen one other Tyler Perry movie, and that was earlier this year with Temptation, Confessions of a Marriage Counselor, and I was equally as underwhelmed with that as well. It has a completely generic and weak premise. The writing is horrible. In terms of my reaction towards the general character, I am not a fan of her whatsoever. I think Medea is borderline inaudible the majority of the time, and I find her antics borderline infuriating. What I did think was kind of interesting about this, in contrast to the clips I've seen from other Tyler Perry films, is that this time he seems to actually be playing with somewhat of an interesting theme, like reverse racism. However, it gets completely scraped to the side, and when he starts ripping off other movies such as Crash, I just left completely flabbergasted that he had the audacity to do this. Tyler Perry is not a good filmmaker, and I'm well aware of that, but the fact that the man is borderline not even trying will never cease to amaze me, the fact that he can still bring in audiences and make money. I have to continue my trend and give Tyler Perry's Madea Christmas an F.
I don't know if this would do anything for you, but I'd be interested to have you go back and watch a couple of the older Medea movies, particularly Medea Goes to Prison, which is my favorite in the series, because I do feel like at this point it's really, really just sort of walking through the motions. I do think this was a bit of an uptick from last year's Medea Witness Protection, which was really, really awful. But is there something to be said for Tyler Perry knowing his audience? Because like you said, people still come out to these movies, they still make money. I agree that Tyler Perry is an awful writer. However, he does seem to know what his audience wants.
He does. I just wish he would show some degree of intelligence with his writing. There's no question that he can attract an audience, but the fact that he continues to churn out generic dreck just because audiences like it speaks volumes about the man.
He's not a very ambitious filmmaker, is what you're getting at.
Pretty much, yes.
In terms of artistic, exploration and whatnot.
But you would also concede that these films are not in any way meant for you.
I'm aware of that. I'm also aware that there's a huge difference between not being marketed towards me and a filmmaker not even trying to make a good movie.
I'm not, going to defend him. I don't think I've given too many Tyler Perry movies high grades. I'm a little intrigued about the one coming out next year, the Women's Club or something.
Single Moms Club or
Single
whatever
Moms Club, yeah. I forget the exact name of it, but yeah. I'm sort of hit or miss with his non-Medea movies. Some of them are awful, and some of them I actually like. My highest graded Perry movie is a movie called Daddy's Little Girls that he wasn't even in. And I thought that was very good and very touching, showed some promise of writing. And I know you missed the Alex Cross movie from last year purposely. But I do think Tyler Perry can act. I know you don't agree with me, but you've never actually seen him act as anything other than Medea in this one film.
Honestly, the only thing I can remember seeing him in was the Star Trek movie where he played like the head of Starfleet.
And he had 3 lines.
He was over 3 lines, and I thought he delivered them fine.
Yeah.
But it was such a flat role, there was really no need.
He was playing a strict guy. I mean, like I said, he didn't bother me, and when people point out that he was Tyler Perry, I'm like, oh, that guy. So, I mean, I don't have a bad impression. I was actually kind of curious about some of the older Medea movies. They looked more entertaining than this one. Like, Daria the Mad Black Woman, I think, was the first one.
Yeah, actually, I have not seen that one, but that is pretty highly regarded.
I've heard the first couple are pretty good. How many are there now?
I think this was the 6th or 7th Medea-specific film.
One?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I'm not going to give it a full grade, but from what I did see, I agree that it's pretty dumb, but I have to confess that I did find myself laughing some of the time. So, I mean, I don't know. I feel like it's something that I would definitely like to try and explore. I watch 1 or 2 of the other movies and see if maybe there's something good there. But it did seem really dumb. But I do agree, Justin. There was like kind of a theme that they were touching on a little bit, but they didn't really go anywhere with it, obviously.
That's sort of how most of his movies are, to be honest.
Just kind of on the surface.
Yeah, well, I mean, some go deeper than other, but every one of his movies is some sort of
There's a message.
issue movie.
But at least,
you know,
but basically, it's just you want to see Medea make some silly comments and.
Yeah, basically.
But I thought she was funny. Or he was funny.
I find the character funny. All right, well, finally in our new release section, we've got the home media moment, and this week that is the to-do list. And this is former Upright Citizens Brigade improver Maggie Carey's first feature film, which she writes and directs. And we find Aubrey Plaza starring as Brandy Clark in this film, a socially awkward high school valedictorian and a virgin. Upon going to a party after graduation, she gets drunk for the first time and decides she wants to do everything sexually she can think of or learn about by the end of the summer, all with her eye on the prize, a hottie lifeguard played by Scott Porter. If this movie had come out when I was a teenager myself, I can see this being a huge hit among me and my friends, with many quotable lines and lots of juvenile humor. And even as an adult, I did get some good laughs out of this movie, but it really teeters on that edge of ridiculous and funny. One of my biggest problems with the movie is its casting. I love Aubrey Plaza and many of the stars in the cast, but they're supposed to be just graduated from high school in this movie, and not that casting full-blown adults to play teenagers is anything new, but we've seen these people on the big and small screen for close to a decade now, already playing past high school. So it was a little hard for me to get the believability of it. The actual adult characters in the film are portrayed by some likable faces, including Bill Hader, Connie Britton, and Clark Gregg. In the wrong hands, this movie could have been an addition to the American Pie direct-to-DVD series, and it almost lands there a few times. But, like I said, I did get a few laughs from it. It certainly wasn't unenjoyable. And, the plot was interesting. So for me, I give the to-do list a C+. Now, Joe, did you get to see this movie?
Sadly, I did not.
You did not. Okay. Well, check it out. See what you think.
I will. I'll definitely let you guys know what I think. Just due to Christmas shopping and whatnot, I didn't have the time.
Yeah, it was kind of a tight week.
It was.
Justin, what'd you think?
The raunchy side of comedy has often been explored in current films, but has never really had the feminine perspective. Fortunately, Aubrey Plaza from Safety Not Guaranteed, also reviewed on this podcast, seems unflinchingly up to the task, causing hilarious, albeit cringe-inducing gags later down the line. The supporting cast complements the humor throughout, even though it does occasionally come off as overly goofy and somewhat gross. But for the most part, it keeps the film from ever truly dragging and getting repetitive. That said, the film does fizzle a bit near the end, and some of the gags, as I mentioned before, can be a little bit too much for some. Overall, the to-do list is still an entertaining film, worth a watch for the right crowd, and I give it a B.
Oh.
Wow, Justin.
A comedy that you rated higher.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, I may have had higher expectations going into it. I love Aubrey Plaza. I think she's one of the standouts of Parks and Recreation.
Have you ever seen the fake trailer that College Humor did for the Daria reunion movie?
No, but I heard about it.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that, because I think she would be perfect for playing the Daria character, but even in the trailer, it was like 10 years afterwards.
Yeah, it was very weird for me. She's been on Parks and Recreation now, I think it's in its 6th season.
5 or 6, yeah.
Yeah, and she's, been playing an adult, and same, Scott Porter, the hottie lifeguard, he was on Friday Night Lights 8 years ago. I don't know, it was a little more believable like Emma Stone and Easy A.
Yeah, when she actually is the role.
Yeah, like she was a little bit younger. She was probably
early 20s.
Early 20s when she was doing the high school thing, and that was a little more believable to me. But like Donald Glover from Community is in this. He's playing a high schooler. That sort of threw me out a little bit.
That's one thing that has always bothered me about these movies that take place in high school. It's something that I've hated for a long time.
Yeah.
I wish that they could find younger actors that could act. I have to believe they're out there.
Well, the main problem is the hours that they're allowed to work, because if you're under 18, you can only work so many hours.
I still feel like you could find like some decent 18-year-old actors.
Yeah, you can find 19, 20-year-olds. I mean, you look at the cast of Glee, and it's like, some of those guys are in their early 30s playing high schoolers.
That's irritating.
Come on.
That's irritating.
And of course, when I was growing up, it was Beverly Hills 90210.
Yeah, I know.
I thought Bill Hader was really funny.
I agree.
I know you don't watch Saturday Night Live quite as regularly as I do, but I think Bill Hader is hilarious. He's actually the husband of the film's writer-director, Maggie Carey.
Didn't know that.
I didn't know it either until I was sort of looking up the history of the movie. movie. But I thought he was one of the bright spots of the movie. I know you were excited to see Clark Gregg.
I was actually really excited to see Connie Britton, too. I was a big fan of Friday Night Lights, as you brought up.
Yeah, that was a bit of a surprise as well. I liked seeing her, too.
I think part of the reason I actually liked it was there are these characters that both have played very straightforward characters, and to hear them getting this comedically graphic is kind of hilarious.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, would you agree that it really was sort of teetering on that edge of, like, gross out but not funny? And, you know, because gross out can be funny or, like, just
too much.
Gross. Yeah. And I thought this was sort of teetering on that.
Definitely.
And in the wrong hands, it could have gone the way of, like I say, those American Pie direct-to-DVD movies.
Oh, yeah.
But obviously, you know, Maggie Carey, with her improv background, has a little bit of wit to her. So it certainly could have been worse, but, yeah, for me it was sort of right down the middle. All right, well, let's move into our top 5. This is a pretty interesting one. We saw Scrooged this week, and also a movie called Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol. So we thought we would take a look at movies with ghosts in them. And, you know, not necessarily horror movies, but, you know, perhaps. Joe, let's start with you and hear movies 5 through 2.
Well, you're going to notice a pattern. I went through a list and I just realized something, but you guys will pick up on it pretty quickly.
Okay.
My number 5 is White Noise. Once again, Michael Keaton is awesome. It's one of his few leading roles I've seen him do in a mainstream film in a while, and even that was about 10 years ago, I think.
Yeah.
But I thought it was really good. He did a good job with the role playing this kind of paranoid guy. It had an interesting take on the whole ghost story aspect, took it to new directions. It was really creepy, had a really unique style to what I liked, and it was scary, and I have to admit, the ending, it just kind of always leaves me feeling a bit disturbed, and it's memorable for that. Number 4 is The Orphanage. Once again, another horror movie, but it shows some really great directing, and it has this really haunting, but not entirely unpleasant atmosphere to it, and I just really like The Orphanage for that reason. It's got some great imagery there. And number 3 is one that I'm sure is going to pop up on someone else's list. It's going to kind of break the pattern, and it's Ghost. It's a great love story. It's a timeless classic. I love Whoopi Goldberg, and I think Demi Moore and Patrick Swayze have some really great chemistry. It's just a good movie, and there's no denying that. Number 2 is thanks to Justin for reminding me about it. It's Nightmare on Elm Street. Just a great horror movie with one of the evilest ghouls ever, Freddy Krueger.
Yeah, definitely a ghost.
Definitely a very, very memorable ghost.
Yeah.
Sweater notwithstanding.
All right. Justin, let's hear your 5 through 2.
Well, we're going to see a little bit of a pattern here. Number 5 is Ghost. While I do confess that Ghost occasionally falters from hyperbolic romantic melodrama, I do have to give credit for its truly unique way of telling a ghost story. Ghost is one of the few films I've seen that really delves into the possibilities, which are apparently limitless in other films like Beetlejuice, and the limitations of being a ghost. If it weren't for that melodrama, it'd be much higher, but on originality alone, I give Ghost my number 5. My number 4 is Ghostbusters. Okay, admittedly this might be a safe choice, but there's no way that Ghostbusters could not be on this list. The film provides great humor amidst a plethora of memorable supernatural beings, and I have to say, is there anything more hilariously adorable than the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man? So for that, Ghostbusters gets my number 4. My number 3 is one that was on Joe's list again, and that was A Nightmare on Elm Street. Freddy Krueger is an iconic ghostly villain, and in some ways, that's part of the problem. It's creepy how inescapable he is, however, the fact that he just cannot close his mouth takes away from his overall terror.
It's true.
As a result, he comes off more often than most as annoying, and for that, what could have been a number 1 ends up as my number 3.
Why can't he close his mouth?
Because he talks a lot. That's what
he talks over.
Oh, okay. I thought he had a physical limitation.
No.
He's a snarky one-liner.
He's the only horror villain I can think of that is a complete jabbermouth.
Yep.
Okay, got it.
That's why people love him.
Mm-hmm.
And number 2, one that showed up on my top 5 supernatural horror from way back when, and that is The Shining. Obviously, I went into more detail with that on that top 5, so I'll try not to revisit old territory. But the ghosts in the film The Shining are just so downright creepy, particularly with their disturbingly calm demeanor. Although it becomes occasionally much more focused on Jack Nicholson's character near the end, the way the ghosts impact him and the hotel itself gives the film a personality all its own, and for that, it gets my number 2.
All right, and you brought up an interesting point there, Justin. We did previously have our top 5 paranormal horror movies. So I, for my list, sort of shied away from those. I don't know that any of them would have made the cut anyway, but I sort of went in the direction of more non-horror films. But my number 5 is, I guess you could consider maybe a thriller, and that would be The Sixth Sense. There's certainly some ghosts in there. He sees some dead people, and I thought this was a really, really great film. Now, granted, I haven't revisited it in a long time, so it'd be interesting to see, knowing everything that you know after you watch it, going through it again. But I really enjoyed The Sixth Sense. My number 4 is Ghostbusters as well, just like Justin. On a side note, one of the timeline problems I had with Anchorman is when Brick says, "I ain't afraid of no ghosts," which is a movie that, of course, didn't come out for about 4 years after the fact. But I do like Ghostbusters. I saw it for the first time only a few years ago, but I did get to see it for the first time on the big screen, which was nice. Stay Puft Marshmallow Man is a full-on classic. And, of course, just a great cast in general. Number 3 is Ghost Town. Now, this is a movie you may not be familiar with. I know I've tried to get Justin to watch it, and it's still on his list.
We'll get there.
But it really was... it came out at a time where I was obsessed with Ricky Gervais. And when I heard he was headlining his own movie, I had to be there opening weekend. Unfortunately, I was one of the only ones. But it's Ricky Gervais, Greg Kinnear, and Téa Leoni. And it's a very, very sweet romantic comedy. And he just happens to be a ghost. And actually, so is Greg Kinnear. He gets killed in the first scene.
Spoilers.
Spoiler alert. If you see 2 minutes of the movie, he gets killed. My number 2, this may be the only repeat on all 3 of our lists. That is Ghost, one of my top 25 movies of all time. Patrick Swayze is fantastic in this. Also, Demi Moore's best role. And for me, Whoopi Goldberg steals the show. Very, very warranted Oscar win for supporting actress for her on that one. If you haven't seen Ghost in a long time, you've probably seen it at some point, but if you haven't seen it in a long time, revisit it because it really does hold up. I saw it a few years ago, and it's just as powerful as it was the first few times I saw it.
Special effects are pretty good, too.
They really were for a film made almost 25 years ago.
Yeah, 90.
The special effects do hold up. I will admit, the pottery Unchained Melody scene is still a little bit corny, just like it was back then.
But it
still kind of hits you.
It's one of those things where it's corny, but it wouldn't be Ghost without it.
That's absolutely true. Yeah,
it happens.
All right, Joe, what's your number 1?
Before I say that, I have to admit I completely did a brain fart not thinking about Ghostbusters because that would have obviously been in my top 5. But
there you go.
I guess I was thinking about Ghost being the center, but guys, just obvious great picks though.
Thank you.
Maybe I'll put Ghostbusters 2 on there to be different.
That's your number 1, Ghostbusters 2.
No, it's not. Actually, it's one that Justin mentioned. It's The Shining, and he pretty much said everything that you could say about it. I think it's just a brilliant work. Nicholson is utilized best as a damaged man driven by the ghosts in the house, but also by the house itself because, as you mentioned, it basically has a soul of its own. Has that great combination of writing, acting, directing, and editing that makes you feel very claustrophobic, and its iconic status is incredibly warranted.
All right, Justin, what's your number 1?
All right, my number 1. I think Joe, you'll appreciate this.
Hope so.
Hopefully.
Terrible.
Given that you brought up The Orphanage, I would hope you have seen it, and that is The Devil's Backbone.
Ooh, that is a good pick.
A great ghost story knows how to take its time, offering up enough to keep the audience's intrigue, but benefiting largely from subtlety. Director Guillermo del Toro takes this to its full potential with a creepy atmosphere that complements the slowly unraveling mystery over the course of the film. And for that, I give it my number 1.
Very cool. That's one I'm not familiar with at all.
That's a good one.
Yeah. Well, my number 1 is another film in my top 25 of all time, and that is Beetlejuice. This is right up there as one of my favorite movies as a kid. I was about 11 when this came out, and it was one that we rented just about every other weekend at the video store. Michael Keaton star of White Noise, gives, I think, his best performance in Beetlejuice. And there's actually quite a few ghosts in this movie, because, of course, Beetlejuice is a ghost, but then early on in the film, Alec Baldwin and Gina Davis become ghosts as well. The movie is funny. Winona Ryder has a great early role in it as the daughter. Catherine O'Hara is very good as well. Just everything works. And here's another one that really still holds up. They always talk about making a sequel to it, which I would be very open to, with at least Michael Keaton in the role.
Sequel would be preferable to remake, I think.
Absolutely. Absolutely, yeah. And it's sort of a shame you can't have Alec Baldwin and Gina Davis back, because, of course, their characters are dead, and they have aged a bit in the last 25 years.
I'm sure that could be a cameo.
But, yeah, I mean, they could make a cameo maybe as, I don't know, they didn't have any kids. I don't know. They could do something with it.
Yeah.
But, yeah, I would definitely be open to that. I think Beetlejuice is a great film.
Cool.
All right, our triple feature now we're going to close with, and that is our new classic, which is a movie enjoyed by Justin and I, and in this case, Joe as well had seen this one previously. And Multiple times, and that's Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol. We have our old classic, which for the first time in about 3 months was picked by me. I was very excited about that. And it is Christmas time, so I had to play one of my favorite Christmas movies, and that is Scrooged. And our Oscar A to Z, there may be a little bit of less love for, and that's The Age of Innocence from 1993. We're going to start with Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol, and Joe, a big fan, is going to tell us about that.
In the fourth installment, we are reunited once again with IMF agent Ethan Hunt, played by Tom Cruise once again. This time, Hunt and his team are on the run, after having been framed for the bombing of the Kremlin. Cruise teams up with Simon Pegg and Jeremy Renner, among others, on a chase across the globe to clear their good names and save the world from a possible nuclear holocaust. This is easily the most fun film in the franchise, as Justin often says, as the actors seem to be enjoying themselves in this very fluid action spy thriller. While the plot does expectedly get a bit convoluted and hard to follow at some points, the main sections of the story are very easy to grasp and the characters are very easy to get behind. The film also has this great sense of humor and some of the best action scenes I've seen in a while. Cruise on the skyscraper still builds tension with every viewing. Mission Impossible 4 gets an A-.
Very nice. Yeah, no, I missed the third installment of the series. I know it's one of your favorites, of course, Philip Seymour Hoffman.
Well, yes, it is my favorite, and that's a big part of it.
Okay, yeah, I missed that one. So for me, Ghost Protocol is my favorite, and by a pretty large margin.
I would say that Ghost Protocol is probably about even with three, maybe even like slightly below. They're right up there. If I had to pick between the two, I guess I just like 3, mostly because of the villain.
Okay. Yeah, I like the first one. Second one is not good.
The first movie I think is decent, but it's a bit slow in the beginning. I think the final act gets pretty good, but it's all right. It's a decent movie.
Yeah.
The second one,
it's not horrible.
It's not horrible.
It's just all right.
It's it's just trying to do too much. It's kind of what Ghost Protocol was trying to do, but going way too far. Like, it gets so ridiculous that it's cheesy. I don't know if it's so bad it's good, but I mean, I'd watch it, but it's easily the worst of them. And 3, I think, was probably the darkest of them. But 4, I think, just had that perfect balance of fun, being serious when it needed to be, and just had this great mesh of cast, great chemistry, and just some funny dialogue. And it was enjoyable. It was a fun ride.
Yeah. I loved, all the cool gadgets they had were great. There's fun action sequences, like you mentioned. I mean, Tom Cruise on the side of the building of 100+ stories. I mean, that's awesome.
And trying to outrun that giant dust bowl.
Yeah, trying to outrun the dust bowl when they blow up the Kremlin. There's a lot of humorous moments in it, like you mentioned, and really a great storyline. I think Protocol is one of the best action movies of the past couple years, for sure. Tom Cruise has not lost a step as Ethan Hunt. I thought he was great. And the idea of the Ghost Protocol itself is a cool one. It's a nice little twist, to the regular spy thriller. And right from the word go, you're inside the action, and you don't really lose that for most of the film. Like you said, it does get a little bit convoluted, the storyline, but I thought it was a very, very welcome return to the character in the series, and I also give Ghost Protocol an A-. Justin?
In the past 3 films, Mission Impossible has been deadly serious while occasionally being engaging at times. But it still ends up being kind of off-putting. Thankfully, new to the series director, Brad Bird, from The Incredibles, gives the film a much-needed sense of humor, as we've already mentioned, and the fun radiates from the end result. The signature wild stunts of the series have never been better, and some of the more underused characters, notably Simon Pegg, finally get their time in the spotlight. However, the film does suffer from a weak and often seldom seen villain who doesn't add much to the overall narrative. That said, Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol is worth a watch for the fun, humor, and great action that I hope lends itself to future installments, because this was such an improvement over the past couple films, and I give it a B+.
So you didn't really care for 3?
3 is complicated because I did like that it got darker, but I also think that
It wasn't fun at all.
it wasn't fun at all.
I think the best way to describe it is, you ever see Casino Royale?
Yes.
Mission Impossible 3 is a lot like Casino Royale, except with what little fun that film had, gone. Like, it's very similar to that,
Pretty much, yeah. And
which is weird.
unfortunately, J.J. Abrams seems to have problems with his conclusions, and Mission Impossible 3 is probably a textbook example of that.
Honestly, I thought it was abrupt, but I didn't really have as big a problem with it as you did. But I understand it. It was a bit weak, but I guess I kind of liked that direction because it does feel very different. I guess because up until that point, I thought the first 2 films were all right, and the third one, honestly, I thought was an improvement on both of those.
Agreed.
But it also did kind of lose that sense of fun that Mission Impossible was kind of known for.
Yeah.
Though I wouldn't say that they've always tried to be serious, because the second one really was not that serious.
2 was at least trying to be a little bit, but I try to forget 2, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I saw it one time in theater, so I don't know, 15 years ago, something like that.
For what it's worth, Anthony Hopkins was awesome in it.
Yeah, you are right, though, that the villain in this, Justin, is hardly ever
He's practically
really
non-existent.
seen. Yeah, he's practically non-existent. But, I don't know. I mean, I like to have fun in my action movies, and I don't know. Sometimes I don't get that sense in a lot of the movies that we get. I mean, I guess there's a fine line, because The Expendables is a lot of attempted fun. I didn't have any fun watching it, but they don't take themselves seriously at all in that movie, and I don't like it. So there's sort of that line to walk.
Well, every movie is different, honestly. If the point of the film was going to be the explosions, it'll make it about the explosions.
Right.
But you can still have like good balance. One example I always use Die Hard. I mean, it's a pretty serious movie, but it's got a lot of funny one-liners and sense of humor. So it's
actually, I think the Red series is probably a pretty decent example. I mean, I don't love those movies specifically, but I sort of like the formula of blending the fun.
That's a
and
decent,
the jokes with the action.
That's a decent way to go, though I honestly do think that a lot of these movies can be serious. I mean, I've seen serious action movies that are good, so
yeah.
I mean, it's not like they have to necessarily be fun.
One of my favorite action movies of the year is Olympus Has Fallen, and as opposed to White House Down, where they were having a lot more humor in it with Jamie Foxx and Channing Tatum, didn't really care for that one as much. Olympus Has Fallen was certainly a more serious way to go with the whole White House hostage situation, and I liked that more. So I don't know. I guess it just
depends on what you're in the mood for.
I guess it does depend on the movie and how it's executed.
Yeah,
so
definitely.
But I will have to give Mission Impossible 3 a go. And
I mean, if nothing else, it has easily the best villain, and you know why that is.
Well, Philip Seymour Hoffman.
Probably the
Can't
most
go wrong.
nonchalant bad guy there ever was. It's hilarious.
Yeah. Well, up next we have our old classic, and that was chosen by me. I was very excited to finally get to pick one. I had a few options on the back burner, but with Christmas impending, I thought it was time to tackle one of my favorites, and that is Scrooged. Now, this is an 80s take on the Dickens classic A Christmas Carol, directed by Richard Donner and starring Bill Murray as Ebenezer. And he's named Frank Cross in this. Cross is a bitter TV programming exec and the youngest one ever, but he got to his place in life by being awful to everyone around him, including his secretary and his own family. The story starts as his network, IBC, is preparing to put together a live Christmas Eve broadcast of A Christmas Carol. He is visited by the corpse of his mentor to show him the error of his ways and to alert him that he'll be visited by 3 ghosts that day. The rest is fairly self-explanatory. Now, this was one of my favorite holiday movies growing up, and watching it around Christmas has become a near-annual tradition. I know it is fairly dated, but Bill Murray's Frank Cross is one of the greatest Scrooges this side of Alastair Sim, and it's definitely a unique take on the story, having Frank work at the TV station, staging a performance of the classic play itself, and then it echoes what's happening to him. The ghosts are a hoot if you're not too annoyed by them, especially the Ghost of Christmas Past, played marvelously by David Johansen. Maybe I have more nostalgic value attached to this film than is deserved, but I do think it has a place in the conversation of all-time A Christmas Carol adaptations, and I'm going to give Scrooged a B+. Joe, what did you think? Now, you've seen this before.
A long time ago. Well, I consider it to be an 80s Christmas classic, and it's kind of funny, as I was doing my Christmas shopping, I saw a bin with, the Christmas classic advertised, and Scrooge was there, and I thought, oh, that's fitting.
There it is.
And I think Bill Murray plays a really great jerk.
He does.
Probably a little too over the top at times, but it does a good job with that. That's kind of one of the things he does best. One thing I really like about this movie, and it's going to be kind of weird, but I really love the prosthetic work. With some of the ghosts.
The ghosts look great.
The undead. I mean, it's just kind of unexpected, like how real it looked. I just love great practical effects, and I really applaud the movie for that. That's just a great little thing I like. I like the commentary on commercialism and corporate greed. It was very fun, reflecting of the time.
Yeah.
The ghosts are funny, though, as you said, they can get a bit annoying at times. I think they overplay it a little bit. But I like the shtick for the most part. I really like the Ghost of Christmas Present. She was really funny.
Yeah.
And abusive.
Yeah, she was great. Carol Kane.
The only real problem I have with the movie is that I felt that Murray's character, what's his name?
Frank Cross is the Scrooge in this.
I always think Scrooge for some reason.
That makes sense.
He is the Scrooge of the film.
Yeah.
But Murray's character, I felt he was a jerk, but maybe it's because he was playing it so over the top, but I never felt that he was bad enough that his transformation was ever really in doubt. You know how normally in the Christmas Carol movies he seems like such a deeply bitter, old, cynical man that it's going to take a lot to push through this guy? I thought that he was a jerk, but I never thought that he was really that bad of a person. I don't know, it didn't quite register for me. And maybe that's partially due to the kind of rushed ending. Like, honestly, he kind of makes that transition after the scene in the funeral.
He does make the transition very quickly.
I liked that part because it got unexpectedly dark and really creepy and weird. It was kind of off from the rest of the movie, and I thought I made a good point, but I thought they should have expanded on that because that's like the pivotal point for the Scrooge character.
Right.
And they kind of rushed that.
I wonder if you mentioned how you weren't really feeling that he was so angry and bitter as some previous Scrooges. I wonder if it's because he is a little bit younger than your average Ebenezer.
Maybe that's...
I mean, Ebenezer's usually played, by
an older guy.
Like 60, 70-year-old person.
You had their whole life of developing this way of thinking.
Right.
He got up there young.
And he's about 40 in this movie.
Maybe.
If that.
He might be even younger than that. And they do explain how he got where he was, but I guess I never got the sense that he was a really horrible person. But he was a jerk.
He was pretty jerky.
He was a big jerk, but I never thought it was much more than that. I thought that kind of hurt. They could have done a little more with that. But overall, I say it's a fun flick, and it's definitely one to watch around Christmas, and I give it a B.
Nice. Justin, interested to hear your take on it.
All right, so the tale of Ebenezer Scrooge has been told in so many varieties, it's tough to bring something new to the table. Setting it in the modern day with commentary on the media was decidedly gutsy, and while I can't say the final product was all it wanted to be, I can't help but applaud the effort to go against the grain. The new turns definitely help, and Murray's addition to humor definitely complements, but he does stumble on the emotional side of things. While it's no spoiler to say Scrooge has a change of heart, the monologue Murray delivers near the end falls completely flat.
I knew that was your least favorite part. I could tell while we were watching it.
Though from a comedy standpoint, Scrooge really is a holiday comedy all its own, and for that, I give it a B.
Oh, that's a little higher than I thought. I really didn't seem like you liked it all that much.
No, I did enjoy it, and I'm kind of actually sad that I hadn't seen it earlier until you pulled it out.
It's really fantastic. It's a shame that so much of the material, because they work for a television station, is kind of dated. I know I had to explain the one Richard Pryor joke to everybody.
I knew who Richard Pryor was.
Well, you knew who he was, but
I didn't think that's one thing that kind of goes against the film, is it's supposed to be such an 80s movie that he does reference a couple of things, like, oh, that's that person. Like,
yeah.
I don't get that. So that's one problem, but you could argue whether or not that's necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah, I think it's definitely one of the more unique takes on the character and the story in general.
I actually thought it was a really cool thing you guys both mentioned about how they were kind of looking at the story of Scrooge and filming it for the special while having this other story independent of that. I mean, that is one of the most unique things like I've ever seen done with the story.
Yeah. And Justin, do you have a particular favorite ghost in the film?
I would probably go with Joe in terms of Ghosts of Christmas Present. I thought she was hilarious.
Yeah. All right. Well, finally, we've got The Age of Innocence, and this is a 1993 film that won for Best Costume Design at the Oscars, and it was nominated for 4 other things, including Best Adapted Screenplay and Best Supporting Actress for Winona Ryder, which is why it qualifies for our A to Z nominees. Justin, tell us about The Age of Innocence.
Like how you have to explain it before this. Like, there's a reason it's here.
So, Newland Archer, played by the very talented Daniel Day-Lewis, is a successful lawyer getting engaged to a young woman named May Welland, played by Winona Ryder. Though once May's cousin, the Countess Olenska, played by Michelle Pfeiffer, arrives, Archer begins to question his overall life path. So if director Martin Scorsese can be credited for anything with his filmography, it's the fact that he does try to have versatility in his overall films. While most known for his gritty crime films like Taxi Driver and Goodfellas, he's also hit other genres such as period pieces like in Hugo and in this one as well. Although The Age of Innocence may be a gorgeously shot film and critically acclaimed, it does suffer from some major setbacks. Despite having a relatively strong cast, Scorsese makes minimal use of them and relies much more heavily on an overbearing voiceover to give a large portion of the overall exposition. This not only feels unnecessary, but often takes the audience out of the story, making every minute of the 130-minute runtime a struggle. That's not to say that the cast doesn't do a good job. If anything, quite the opposite. I just wish they had been given more to do, because if they had, this might have gotten a higher grade. But unfortunately, The Age of Innocence barely gets by with a B-.
I actually went through this movie partially a second time because we were so bored with it when we watched it for Oscar nominee night that we were talking a lot. So I wanted to kind of give it a fair shake. I got through about the first half of it a second time, but our initial reaction was not too off the mark, I have to say. It's not very interesting. The constant narration, like Justin said, not only takes you out of the story, but after the first few times, it's really quite annoying. But that being said, the look of the film is beautiful. You can see easily how it won an Oscar for the costume design and how it was nominated for other certain technical awards. And the actors do a good job. You know, I'm a big Winona Ryder fan anyway, so I don't mind that she was nominated for supporting actress. But, yeah, this one was just super boring. I'm going to give Age of Innocence a C-. Joe?
Well, you know, we're going to try and say something positive. It's funny. I didn't know it was nominated for the costume design, and I thought that with the set design and the costumes, that was easily, along with the cinematography, was the best part of the film. I mean, the costumes were beautiful, the cinematography was
cinematography
beautiful.
May have been one of the others it was nominated for.
It's a really fantastic looking film. I really did like that. And I thought that what little acting there was great. I just wish that the director, Scorsese, would have said, hey, let's tell the story through the characters with the actors and let these great people do what they do. I mean, this should be a movie that, by all accounts, I should like more than I ultimately did. I mean, it's got Daniel Day-Lewis. I mean, he's one of my favorites, one of the best actors ever. Winona Ryder's good. She does some great work as well. And Michelle Pfeiffer's a fan favorite of mine. I mean, Batman Returns.
What else can you say?
Enough said.
Enough said. You know, I mean, I should like this movie, but it didn't really entertain me. And as you guys mentioned, the voiceover was so overdone. It's probably one of the worst I've ever seen. It just takes you so out of the story. You feel like you shouldn't even be watching it. It's like a visual aid to the novel, like we commented on.
At times it was as if she was just reading the book to us. And it was like book on tape with visuals.
Yeah, we had the visuals presented to us. It's like, why is this even a movie?
Right.
I mean, and that's unfortunately a huge part of the movie, and by the time the actors can do what they do, it doesn't really have the same effect. Though it did look like they were doing a pretty good job. And unfortunately, it didn't really entertain me, and that kind of kills the mood. However, I will admit I was a bit distracted at the time because we were trying to get into it and we just ended up talking so we could get through it.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm going to try and give it somewhat a benefit of the doubt, but it doesn't really break the monotony of that film, and I think that that's one of the worst things you could possibly do. Still, I thought the performances were great, the cinematography was good, and the costume design was fantastic. So, without going back to look at it, at some point in the future, I'm going to give Age of Innocence a C-.
All right. I think that's fair. That was pretty much where I was leaning after we watched it, and then watching part of it today, it was like, yeah, I think the C- is on the money. It was not nominated for cinematography, but art direction,
which is
so
related.
kind of in the same vein there. And the score was the other non acting or screenplay
Music was
nod
good.
that it got.
I can see it.
Yeah.
To make one minor note, I did actually see this one prior and tried to get you both cautioned about its incredibly boring nature. So
I'm surprised you gave it a B-, to be honest.
Well, we have to take into consideration the way I grade. Yes,
I know.
personal enjoyment suffered immensely from this, but stylistically, there was a lot to like here. Mm-hmm. And narratively, it was still a coherent story, and with some good acting. I wish the voiceover hadn't been a complete and utter nightmare. But
I guess, unfortunately, coherent and compelling don't always go hand in hand.
Yeah,
that too, yeah.
I feel like just generally, if a person, the average person, would be super bored with it, I certainly take that into consideration. Friend of the show, Destiny, she loves these epic pieces, and I'm sure she would have loved this movie.
I honestly was thinking about it, too. I think she might have really enjoyed it, because it's very much...
Shame she wasn't here that night.
No, I think she would have liked it.
But yeah, for you and I, Joe, it just wasn't...
It was tough. It was really tough.
We've been sort of through a bad rut lately. Afterglow, we both gave Fs to. Justin graded that one a bit higher as well. Next week, we'll see. We've got this movie called Agnes of God from the 80s, starring Jane Fonda. We'll see. Maybe it'll break the mold. We've gotten through some that we've never heard of that were actually pleasant surprises. So.
That's true. I mean, Cellini.
Yeah, the affairs of Cellini would be,
like
would be the poster child, yeah. All right, well, that is going to wrap up the show. Now, we have our best of coming up in 2 weeks. We're not going to do it next week because there's a bunch of movies coming out Christmas Day that we'd like to get on board with reviewing beforehand. And like Joe mentioned earlier, it was a pretty busy week with Christmas shopping and extra workload and everything. So we didn't actually even get to everything that came out this week. We've got Saving Mr. Banks and Walking with Dinosaurs to tackle as well.
Definitely.
And like I said, some of the ones on Christmas. So in 2 weeks, we're going to do our best and worst of the year. So be listening for that. Joe, anything new on the Merlin YouTube page?
Well, I just did some more viewing of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Series with some friends of mine. Those are kind of entertaining. And I also am doing some discussions on certain series. And I'm just reached 700 subs, so I'm going to do another Q&A if anybody's interested.
Oh, very cool. Yeah, that's one to check out. And you can link to your page on the in the description of this video here on YouTube. And you can, of course, join in the conversation as well. If you have a favorite Christmas movie or a top 5 ghost movie, let us know that. Love to hear from you. And you can follow us on Twitter as well, of course, and that's at Film Fanatics Pod. And thanks for listening. We'll see you back here next week. Bye.